A woman kneels in the dirt outside a manor house. Her hands tremble as she gathers wheat stalks abandoned in the field. The landowner is dead. His steward is dead. The bailiff who collected rents each autumn lies beneath quicklime 3 miles away. She knows the law. These fields belong to the Lord's distant nephew, a man she has never seen. But the wheat will rot. Her children are hungry. She takes the grain. No one stops her. Across England, across France, across the German lands, 1,000 small transgressions like this are rewriting the rules of power. The world is dying, and in its dying, something new is being born. 40 years earlier, the roads of Europe hum with order and obligation. A peasant boy walks behind his father's plow in Normandy, turning heavy clay soil as his grandfather did, as his great-grandfather did. The furrows run straight. The work is endless. 3 days each week they labor on the Lord's domain. The rest of the time they tend their own narrow strips, paying rent in grain and eggs in service. Everyone knows their place. In the towns, guildmasters regulate every detail: how much a baker may charge for bread, how wide a weaver's cloth must be, who may sell fish in the market square. The laws are written and rewritten, enforced by aldermen who believe that order prevents chaos. In the great cathedral cities, masons carve stone, glaziers set colored glass, and merchants negotiate wool prices in the shadow of spires reaching toward heaven. The population has swelled to numbers not seen since Roman times. Fields are planted to their edges. New villages sprout in forest clearings. The world feels full, crowded, all humming with human energy. In the manor houses, lords keep careful records: who owes labor, who owes coin, who failed to appear at the harvest. Control depends on documentation. Memory is written down, archived, enforceable. The church teaches submission to earthly authority as preparation for heavenly reward. Kings claim divine sanction. The structure holds because everyone, from archbishop to dairymaid, believes in its permanence. But the air is changing. Summers grow cooler. Harvests fail more often. Hunger becomes familiar. The world is straining at its limits. The ships arrive in Messina in October 1347. 12 Genoese galleys fleeing from the Crimean coast where a Mongol siege has collapsed into disease and death. The sailors are sick. Some are already dying. Within days, the infection spreads through the port. The smell of decay fills the harbor. Families lock their doors. The disease follows the roads and rivers northward: Genoa, Marseille, Avignon. A Florentine chronicler watches from his window as carts roll through the streets before dawn, stacked with bodies wrapped in stained linen. There are too many dead to bury with ceremony. The graveyards overflow. Pits are dug beyond the city walls. Bodies are layered with quicklime. The stench carries on the wind. Church bells ring constantly, marking deaths until the bell ringers themselves fall silent. The plague is not one thing but many sufferings. Fever, swellings in the neck and groin, hard as stones, black bruising across the skin, delirium, death. Some die within hours. Others linger for days, crying out for water no one will bring. Physicians trained in the old text try bloodletting. Herbal poultices, prayers written on parchment and hung around the neck. Nothing works. The disease does not distinguish between the devout and the sinner, the rich and the poor. It kills without logic. Families abandon their sick. Priests stop visiting the dying. Markets close. Trade halts. In the countryside, entire villages are abandoned mid-season. Tools lie rusting in fields. Livestock wander loose, lowing in empty lanes. The plague travels north through France, reaching Paris by summer 1348. It crosses the Channel into England that June, arriving first at Melcombe in Dorset, then spreading through Bristol, London, Norwich. It moves up the North Sea coasts into the Baltic, across the German lands and Poland. By 1350, a third of Europe's population is dead. In some regions, half. 30 million people, perhaps more. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. The world that survives is emptier, quieter, haunted by absence and the memory of screaming. In the years that follow, the survivors begin to move. A young man leaves the village where his parents and siblings died. He walks 30 miles to a town where no one knows his family, where no one can hold him to the obligations of his birth. He finds work in a tannery. The stink of urine and bark liquor clings to his clothes, but the pay is better than he ever imagined. Labor is scarce now. Employers compete for workers. Across England, peasants abandon the estates where they were bound by law and custom, seeking higher wages, better conditions, freedom from the old contracts. Landowners panic. They petition the crown. In 1349, King Edward III issues the Ordinance of Laborers, for freezing wages at pre-plague levels and forbidding workers from leaving their home parishes. The law is clear, forceful, unambiguous. It is also unenforceable. There are not enough bailiffs, not enough justices, not enough agents of authority to track and punish every runaway laborer. The infrastructure of control has been decimated. A manor steward sits in his hall with account rolls spread before him, calculating how much grain was sown and harvested, how much rent is owed, who owes labor service. Half the names on his list are crossed through in black ink. The surviving tenants refuse to work without payment. They negotiate. They make demands. Some simply walk away at night, vanishing into the forests. The Lord's power, once absolute in theory, dissolves in the face of practical reality. He needs workers more than workers need him. The balance has shifted. In Parliament, nobles and gentry complain bitterly about the insolence of the lower classes. Servants demand meat and ale. Plowmen expect wages in coin. They pass more laws, each more desperate than the last. The Statute of Laborers in 1351 sets detailed penalties for violations. Justices ride from village to village, holding sessions, imposing fines. But the economic pressure is too great. Wages continue to rise. Workers continue to move. The old bonds of serfdom begin to fray and snap like rotted rope. In the cities, the changes cut deeper. Guild regulations, once strictly enforced, become negotiable. New craftsmen enter trades without serving the traditional 7-year apprenticeships. In Bruges, a widow inherits her husband's weaving workshop. The guild protests. She produces cloth anyway, hiring girls from the countryside who work for less than men. The guild threatens sanctions. She ignores them. There are not enough weavers left to maintain the old monopolies. The merchant class expands, taking advantage of reduced competition and rising demand. Wealth that once flowed upward to great nobles and the church now spreads more widely. A draper in Bordeaux commissions a stone house with glazed windows. A vintner buys a small vineyard that once belonged to a monastery. Consumption patterns shift. The survivors have inherited money, land, goods from the dead. They spend. Luxury trades flourish. Silk weavers, goldsmiths, furriers find eager customers who want comfort in a world that proved mortal. At the same time, vast tracts of farmland lie abandoned. The poorest, least productive soil reverts to pasture or forest. Landowners turn to sheep farming, which requires fewer workers. England's wool exports soar. The landscape changes. Fewer villages, larger flocks, emptier roads overgrown with grass. In Eastern Europe, where population density was always lower, lords respond differently. They tighten their grip, imposing harsher restrictions on peasant mobility. But in the West, the movement is toward freedom, toward wage labor, toward a world where economic relationships are negotiated rather than inherited. The transformation is not smooth. In 1358, French peasants rise in a furious revolt called the Jacquerie. They storm manor houses, killing nobles and burning records. The reprisal is brutal. Thousands are slaughtered. In 1381, English peasants march on London, demanding the end of serfdom and the repeal of the labor laws. They meet with the young king Richard II at Smithfield. He promises reforms. The promises are broken. The rebel leaders are hunted down and hanged, but the underlying forces continue. The old system cannot be restored. There are simply not enough people to make it work. The church, which dominated medieval life with unchallenged authority, faces its own crisis. During the plague years, priests and monks died in enormous numbers, often while caring for the sick. Their courage was noted, but their prayers did not stop the dying. The sacraments did not protect the faithful. A priest in Avignon watches half his congregation disappear in a month. He wonders why God permits such suffering. Why did the pious die alongside the wicked? He does not speak these doubts aloud, but others do. New religious movements emerge, emphasizing personal piety over institutional ritual. In England, followers of John Wycliffe argue that Scripture should be available in the common language, that the Church's wealth is corrupt, that individuals can approach God without priestly mediation. Similar movements arise across Europe. The church hierarchy responds with repression, with accusations of heresy, with burnings. But the doubts linger like smoke. At the same time, the economic base of ecclesiastical power erodes. Monasteries and cathedrals had relied on rents from vast estates, on donations from the faithful, on labor services from dependent peasants. All of these revenue streams dry up. Monasteries struggle to maintain their buildings. Roofs leak, stone walls crack. Some churches are abandoned entirely, their altars stripped, their bells sold for scrap metal. So the physical presence of the church diminishes even as its spiritual authority is questioned. This is not yet the Reformation, but the seeds are being planted in soil prepared by death and disillusionment. A young monk in a German monastery copies scripture by candlelight, wondering if Latin words spoken by corrupt priests have any power at all. The question will not be answered in his lifetime, but it will not go away. The world that emerges from the plague years is leaner, more mobile, more unpredictable. In England, the population will not return to pre-plague levels for more than 2 centuries. Villages that were abandoned in the 1350s remain ruins, their outlines still visible as ridges in pastureland where sheep graze. But the survivors live better. They eat more meat, drink more ale, wear better clothing. Real wages rise steadily through the late 14th and 15th centuries, reaching levels that will not be seen again until the Industrial Revolution. The purchasing power of an English laborer in 1450 is higher than it was in 1300, or will be in 1600. This is the paradox of the post-plague world, individual prosperity rising from collective catastrophe. The empty lands and higher wages also create opportunities for innovation. Farmers experiment with crop rotation, with new tools, with techniques that maximize output from reduced labor. In the towns, entrepreneurs invest in labor-saving devices, water mills for fulling cloth, mechanical looms, improved furnaces for metalworking. The pressure to do more with fewer hands becomes a driver of technological change. The legal and political landscape shifts as well. The power of kings grows stronger in some ways, as they position themselves as arbiters of disputes between nobles and commoners. But royal authority is also challenged. Parliaments and estates general gain influence, using the crown's need for tax revenue to extract concessions, to demand representation, to assert that governance requires consent. The plague does not create democracy, but it begins to fracture the old certainties about hierarchy and obedience. A merchant sits in the House of Commons voting on laws that once would have been decided by nobles alone. The world is becoming something new. The memory of the plague lingers in art and literature. In churches across Europe, painters create images of the danse macabre, skeletons leading popes and peasants in a line toward the grave. Death is no longer a distant theological concept, but a vivid, immediate reality. Life is short. Pleasure and profit must be seized. The Renaissance, when it comes, will draw on this new awareness of human fragility and human possibility. The reforms that follow the plague are silent, not because they are peaceful. There are revolts, massacres, legal battles, but because they happen without grand declarations. No philosophers design new systems. No revolutionaries articulate visions of justice. The changes happen in quiet choices. The woman who takes the grain, the man who leaves his village, the landowner who pays wages instead of demanding service. These small acts accumulate into structural change. The feudal order, which seemed eternal in 1300, is visibly crumbling by 1400. Serfdom will persist in pockets, especially in Eastern Europe. But the trajectory is set. Europe is moving toward a world of markets and mobility, of wage labor and contract law, of individuals negotiating their place in society rather than accepting the place assigned by birth. The plague accelerates processes already underway: urbanization, commercialization, the weakening of seigneurial authority, but it does so with devastating speed. What might have taken centuries happens in decades. A generation that knew only the old world dies. A generation that knows only the new world rises. The transition is written in account books and wage contracts, in abandoned villages and rising cities, in the records of justices who prosecute runaway laborers, and the records of laborers who win their freedom anyway. Today, we look back at the 14th century and see the roots of modernity emerging from medieval soil. The economic structures that define capitalism, free labor, market wages, contract enforcement, private property, gain strength in the post-plague world. The political ideas that shape the modern state, centralized authority, legal equality, representative institutions, begin to develop as old hierarchies prove inadequate. The cultural shifts that lead to the Reformation and the Enlightenment, skepticism toward institutional authority, emphasis on individual conscience, vernacular literacy, are born in the crisis of faith and order that follows the Black Death. We also see a reminder of how fragile, complex societies are, how quickly structures that seem permanent can collapse, how profoundly external shocks can reshape human affairs. The plague did not have a plan. It did not intend to liberate peasants or weaken the church or stimulate economic growth. It simply killed indiscriminately and mercilessly. But the survivors, in their millions of individual choices, rebuilt the world differently. They created new norms, new expectations, new possibilities. History is not only the story of kings and battles and treaties, it is also the story of ordinary people navigating catastrophe, adapting to new realities, seizing opportunities that tragedy creates. The woman who took the grain from the abandoned field, her children survived. They grew up in a world where labor had value, where movement was possible, where the old certainties had dissolved. Her great-grandchildren would live in cities, own property, read books in their own language. The silent reforms were real because everyone lived them. The medieval world did not end with the plague, but it began to end. And what came after, for all its violence and uncertainty, opened pathways to a world we would recognize. The hinge of history turns on such moments. The past becomes the present becomes the future, and ordinary people making ordinary choices in extraordinary times shape it all.